have Dr. Christine here with me. We are going to be jumping right in. This is going to be a shorter conversation this evening, but just obviously with Valentine's week upon us, I think these are meaningful conversations just because so many people are now looking to breath work, to mindfulness, to even spending more time in nature. And I think these are all really meaningful things, but what are we really doing? What's happening underneath the hood a little bit? So I think we'll just kind of start there. Hello.
Hello, thank you for having me this evening. Hello, everyone.
And yeah, so I think we'll just kind of start with, what is heart coherence and, how does heart rate variability, blood pressure, and just our even brainwave states, how do those all kind of play into what heart coherence really is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things to focus on is the concept of what is coherence, right? Coherence is the idea of frequencies kind of all being in agreement with one another and complementary. So the concept of like a symphony versus multiple instruments playing music at the same time, but not necessarily playing together. I think that's a really good way to think of it. So if you think of each piece of your body as an instrument, right? We have our heart, we have our cardiovascular system, which is like our blood vessels, our blood pressure, our hormones, and then also our brain waves. And it's like those are all kind of each their own instrument. And if they're all playing out of sync, it's going to create kind of this cacophony of sound or like this static that's going on in the body. Versus if we can start to get them all in tune with one another, then it's a much more pleasant and productive type of frequency to work with. So when we're talking about heart coherence, it's the concept of the heart, our heart rate variability, which is like your heart's ability to adapt to your environment and adapt to stress in synchronization with your brain waves. And what are your brain waves doing? Because a lot of us tend to operate in what's called like a beta state, which is where, think of it as like when you're kind of preparing to take an exam, that kind of state where you're like a little bit activated but you're not quite calm, but also you need that activation to operate in our daily lives. Like we move really quickly, we drive 60 miles an hour on the highway, we have work projects coming up, we have to get things done. But then when we start to either kind of come down in the evening or like first thing when we wake up in the morning, we're in more of an alpha state, and that's like a calmer, slower brainwave state. So when we're in heart coherence, we usually kind of drop out of that like get stuff done beta state, and we drop more into a calmer, creative type of state. So when we're in alpha state, this is when we're in our most creative state, when we can do art, when we're in a type of flow state, a type of meditative state. So if we can ask the brain and the heart to start communicating with each other, simply, you can even do it as simply as like focusing on it, right? If you focus on your heart and you focus on your breath and the breath coming in and out of the heart, we even start to bring ourselves into this state, which is why just breath work can be one of the simplest ways to enter a heart coherent state. But there's a lot of different ways to emphasize it as well. And as we start to do this, then our cardiovascular system, our blood pressure catches up because it's not separate from the heart. And as we do this, our hormones start to regulate, our immune system starts to regulate. And this has been shown by studies by the HeartMath Institute, Dr. Joe Dispenza, all of those things. So as we practice this, it's like a muscle, it gets stronger.
Hmm. Uh, I love that because some of the things that we work with at the Denver Zen Den is actually looking at the brain waves, and if we are slowing them down, really what is that space? And intuition is one of those things, and then also compassion and empathy because we're also, I think, seeing more of the connection, not just the quick monkey mind reactions to somebody cutting you off or these different things that happen on a daily basis. And I mean, and these get more micro, especially in relationships where we don't notice that there's these patterns of how we show up. And so I think that this obviously has such a relevancy for what we're doing with our body and our overall health, but also with our communication and some other things that we'll kind of get into. Um, yeah, you also mentioned heart math, and uh, what would you say is the purpose of heart math? And are there, I know we work with heart math devices that actually, people can then track their, HRV before they go into a session. And but how could that also be used for home? And what does that look like these days?
Yeah, so the HeartMath Institute is a broad institute. They study a whole bunch of different things. They've even had experiments where they show like if someone focuses their attention on a certain culture of bacteria, that culture will grow more than another culture. So our frequency and our attention and our intention have power, because when you start to understand the world through the laws of physics, which is the foundational component of everything, you realize like everything is frequency. We are frequency. This table is frequency. The way that our Wi-Fi works is frequency, right? Like there are frequencies around us all the time. And I remember when I was studying, my study was more in like neurology and biology. And then I realized to really understand those, you have to understand chemistry. And then to really understand chemistry, you have to understand physics. And then to really understand physics, you have to understand quantum physics. And then it like loops you right back into the more spiritual realm. And it's quite interesting when you start to see the world like that. And also when you think about even just like the visual light spectrum, right? Like the spectrum of frequency of light is this big, and what we can actually see is about this big. And so there are so many things going on in our world that we can't even perceive. And then you think about, the different creatures in life that have different kinds of vision, like creatures that can understand like thermal expression, and they see through kind of heat and that kind of imagery. So when we start to understand that there's such a variety of these things, and we come back to the things that HeartMath Institute studies, like I think heart rate variability is probably the most well-known component of it all. And that's basically, again, going back to it, it's studying your body's ability to adapt to your environment and adapt to stress. So if you have a high heart rate variability, right? It means variable. It means your heart rate can go up and down based on what stress you're being presented with in your environment. If you don't have a good heart rate variability, your heart is not good at adapting, and you're not as good at adapting to stress. So if we can start to understand where we lie on that spectrum by using these tools and measuring it from time to time, whether it's at the Zen or at home or using some of your own tools, then you can start to have this relationship with your body that you didn't know was there before. And it's like this muscle that you get to start working. And it is something where, like anything else, it gets stronger with practice. And so if we can start practicing it more and truly understanding when we are in a state of good heart rate variability or when we're in a state of good adaptability, then you can start to apply that more to your life, or you can understand why you're not good at adapting to stress. And maybe it's because you have a low heart rate variability, because you're operating in that beta brainwave state where you're preparing for the exam, but you don't even know it because you've been in that state for 20 years. So if you can come and do an experience like the Zen provides, this is actually what got me out of research and into body work, was these kinds of concepts, is that you can be in that state where you don't even know that you're stressed out, but then you finally have an experience that through sensation brings your brain out of a beta state and into an alpha state outside of sleep, like when you're in a conscious state. And then all of a sudden you kind of come back to your normal awareness. You go, oh my gosh, I like didn't even realize that I was in another state. And so it's like you get this taste of a new reality, and it gives you a map of where you can go and where you've been because you didn't even know you were there. And when you start to have that map, it opens this entirely new way to participate in your life and a totally new way to show up that's a lot more pleasant. And you form better memories because you're not in like a fight or flight state. So you actually remember more of your life. So if you think about it, like there's times in your life where you've been super stressed out and you like barely remember them. It's because you're in a beta state. You're not in a state where you form memories really well. So when we come into more of a very like a healthy heart rate variability type state, more of a state where we can kind of regulate our own brain waves, you get access to all of the resources your body has to offer, instead of this like little teeny sliver of what it's like to exist in a beta fight or flight state. And when you can come more into an alpha state, you actually start to communicate with things like your immune system through frequency and you start to retrain your immune system. So this can be really incredible for people struggling with things like autoimmune, where your immune system is on overdrive all the time. And that is, showed by the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza
Mhm.
across the world through thousands and thousands of cases of people literally reversing irreversible health conditions simply because they learned how to work with heart coherence.
Yeah. I mean, there's layers on layers with it. I think the other thing that I want to make sure that we, kind of state is that you don't want to be in one state all the time. I mean, again, it's the agility to move from state to state. So we actually, and beta is good for certain processing. Then there's gamma, and there's, there's these different places that we want to be at different times. And it's actually about being able to switch quickly and multiple times throughout the day so that that system is actually really getting that elasticity and plasticity, I guess you could say in some ways as well, because you're literally reprogramming your brain by doing heart coherence and you're allowing for the state, set and setting, as we like to say. We're preparing it so that the connection points can be rewired. And of course, we all have some things that we could probably use a little rewiring. And so I think now we have a little foundation for what heart coherence or coherence is. And today I was taking some notes on, really what we're pointing to this week, especially we have a midday sound serenade on Wednesday at 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time that we'll be doing with a sound journey or a sound activation. It'll be just kind of a nice little post lunch or even lunchtime thing to kind of get a reset during the day. And then we do have an event on Friday evening at the Archipelago Wellness Mansion up in the attic. And yeah, but the themes are really coherence, love, and emotional wellness. And, thinking of that, there's actually an interstitialness that each of them kind of specifically has. And how does that show up in our life? And, thinking about heart coherence and love, that's really where we have the deeper emotional kind of connections. That's where we have compassion. That's where we're developing appreciation. That's when getting into the coherent state that Dr. Christine just spoke of, that's where we can really start to utilize those states because it's one thing to get to them and it's like, well, what are we doing? And I think the more that we recognize the benefit of doing these, the more that hopefully we're empowered to actually then do these exercises or routines in a more habitual way. But going back to the interstitialness, then we have looking at heart coherence and then emotional wellness. That's more actually feeling stable. Like that's about clarity. There's more of that positivity feeling when you really have your emotional well-being and your heart coherent in a place that they're co-regulated and synchronizing. And then the final connections are then you have love and emotional wellness. And then that's kind of more of our state of belonging. And, that's where we feel purpose. That's where we feel even actually more resilience. That's where we can kind of dig in. And, I think that quite often I used to think of heart coherence as just like, oh, I feel love for this person. And I didn't realize what a tool that can be with just, again, being in nature and getting activated by nature in that way, or things like that, that really allow for, I think, the purity of that value to actually be expressed in multiple ways, not just, in the intimate ways.
Can I get nerdy and sciencey for a sec? Okay, cool. So for all of my left brainers out there, all my science people, I feel you. So let's talk about this in a way where we kind of blend the two. So when we're talking about this state, like being in a state of love, right? We come back to the idea of frequency, and love is known as the emotion that oscillates at one of the highest frequencies, whereas things like fear and guilt and shame and disgust oscillate at the lowest frequencies. When we're in a low frequency, we are closer to the concept of matter, right? Matter in our environment oscillates at a low frequency versus when we're at a higher frequency, that tends to be more like energy and light waves and not matter. So if we're trying to do things like, say, manifest something in our lives, We want to be operating more in the energetic realm. So you're going to be able to manifest things in your life better when you are personally in a state of love and gratitude and oscillating at a frequency that resonates more with energy. And then you'll start pulling energy into your life that will then become tangible matter in your life. So that's kind of the concept of manifestation. Now, when we start to talk about things like chakras, this is where sometimes on the science side of things, I'll lose people. But let me give you anatomical evidence of why chakras exist and why this stuff works and why your biofield actually expands in a literal toroidal magnetic field when you start doing these things. So chakra is like spinning wheel of energy in the body, right? And when we're talking about the sense of safety and tribe, that's really like our root chakra. And so the root chakra, the emotion that blocks it is fear. So that like lower end emotion. But when we're thinking about our chakras, they are actually associated with what's called neural ganglia in our bodies. It's basically a bunch of neurons that come together in a little group and they operate together. That's a ganglia. So when you think about how a neuron works, it sends a charged particle in motion, right? We're sending ions in motion. That's how a neuron sends signals. What is a charged particle in motion except something very similar to a battery? We actually create a field, and that's how a battery works. So when we start sending charged particles in motion, we're creating this magnetic field. It's called a toroidal field. So we have one neuron sending a charged particle in motion, creating a toroidal field. Now, if we put a whole bunch of them together and they're all sending charged particles in motion, we're creating a bigger magnetic field. So then you start logically thinking that if every chakra is associated with a ganglia in our body, and we're sending all these charged particles in motion, then you are creating magnetic fields at the site of each chakra. And when you come to the heart, that one has the biggest magnetic field of all, even bigger than your brain. And so this is the type of stuff that the HeartMath Institute studies, is like, how big can your heart field get? And it can actually go up to like 3 meters outside the body. And when you are in a state of heart coherence, your field gets bigger and broader. And then all of a sudden you can sense more around you because this is your biofield. So if you think about like when you're in a stressed out state, you're not going to be super aware of someone coming in the door of the room behind you. But when you're very calm, all of a sudden you get this like little energetic sense that someone else is in the room. That's your biofield sensing their biofield. So when we can start to work with this stuff, not only do we like expand ourselves to the point where we can actually manifest more things in our life, we actually become more aware of our environment and able to interact with it in a completely different level. And when we're in nature, it amplifies everything that we're doing. So when we get to start playing with these things and understanding them as like not just esoteric concepts, but things that are quite tangible on a physics frequency level, that's really what we're doing and what we're talking about. It's frequency medicine. And Einstein said the future of medicine is frequency. And Tesla said, if you really want to understand the universe, study frequency. So I'm going to listen to the two guys that are like way smarter than anybody else. And I'm going to focus on understanding the world through frequency.
I love that. And I think that there's a couple of things. I love starting to see, especially Western culture, find ways to, I think, kind of explain some of this mysticism and then still allowing for the novelty of not knowing. And that's one of the things that Dr. Joe Dispenza is very big about is, how to create space for awe. And there's things that it's not just about figuring it all out. It's about not knowing everything and being curious and really just being a part of these types of conversations.
Yes, absolutely. And when you think about like Joe Dispenza's work and the concept of like being okay in the unknown, they're still trying to understand how this stuff works because they're doing all of these studies that are like backed by the University of San Diego Medical Institute. And it's amazing because they're watching these people heal. They're watching people who have never meditated before in their life, changing nothing else in their life, nothing about their diet, nothing. Like literally their entire gut microbiome shifts from meditating regularly for a week.
Mhm.
So not only are you changing your frequency, you're changing your cellular structure. And if you think about when you're in a beta state versus kind of like an alpha state, right? So kind of that fight or flight state versus more like a calm creative state. When we're in that fight or flight state, our cells actually can enter something called a cellular danger response. And they get stiff, like their membranes stiffen up. It's a protective state. So they don't absorb nutrients as well. So like when I'm working with patients, if I have somebody come in and I can tell that they're in more of like a beta brainwave state, I'm not going to start that person with nutrients because they can't even absorb them correctly. I'm going to start that person with nervous system work, or I'm going to refer them over to the Zenden to go help their nervous system get into a state where they can actually interact with the world in a more productive way. And so when we study like stuff with Joe Dispenza and what he's doing, they're still coming to understand it. But these people are essentially sitting in a space of the unknown and just sitting with nothingness, forgetting that they exist, forgetting their identity, forgetting their illness, forgetting their problems, forgetting their worries. And they're just existing in this state of peace and unconditional love. And it's not love towards themselves. It's not love towards somebody else. It's just the frequency of love. And that's what takes practice, is discovering what that is. Because if you haven't experienced that in your life in 3 to 4 decades, you've forgotten it. But we all know what it is. It's like, it's what we were when we were a child, and we're just, like sitting in happy baby pose and just like enjoying the world and being intrigued by it. So if we can come back to those states where it's just like, what does it feel like to experience pure gratitude without something that I'm feeling gratitude for?
Mhm.
Like, what's the experience of the emotion itself? What's the experience of the emotion of love itself without having to love an outside source? And that is the practice of like feeling these frequencies and understanding what they feel like in your body, because the feeling of them is significantly more important than the understanding of them. But there's like a blend of like, you have to understand them a little bit to be able to experience the feeling. But once you understand the feeling, then it becomes an exploration of expanding that and really what it feels like as it's coursing through your cells. And I think that's where I have a big appreciation for what the Zen is doing, is because not only do they provide you this experience, but they're really good at providing the ceremony around it and the intention that goes with it. And when you go in with an intention, even to like plant medicine, anything like that, like if you look at all of our old cultures and where plant medicine actually comes from, there's always, always ceremony involved. And I think ceremony is about 95% of the medicine. And when you have this ceremony and you're setting your intention, that is the frequency, that is the energy. You're choosing the frequency that you want to have. And I, work with a variety of emotional clearing modalities as well. And the way that these work is you have to select the frequency and the intention that you want to have. You have to select the emotion that you want to experience. And then you're basically using neurological imprinting to imprint it into the brain and the body. But you have to select what it is first. So when you do this intention, and then you have a sensory experience that imbues it into your body and your neurology, that's where the power comes from.
Well, you dipped into our next conversation around, what our strategies and rituals and intentions are definitely part of that. Again, I think these are things that we all enjoy, especially when we do include them on a regular basis. Yes, we can have our celebrations of the holidays and things like that. And those, of course, have some specialness, but I think the real sweetness of what the emotional well-being gets to really soak in is when it is on a very consistent basis. So the other thing though that really struck me is in working with more flow state people, athletes, professional leaders, those are the people that are looking for that high mindset state that they can, discover the new idea or solve the problems or see the shot and be, 3 steps ahead. But I also think that there's something with flow state that it's also about the connection with others. Because we just had a 4-time world champion, cowboy, Tough Cooper, came in and before his finals here at the Denver Stockyard, and he just couldn't stop talking about how his coherence from using things, vibration, light, sound, music that he listens to, how that puts him in state so he can really connect with his horse. And the beautiful thing about that is that a horse, isn't. I've actually done some equine therapy, and the horse's ear will perk up as the horse is moving around the arena, if it's tracking you, if you are in that pure state of love or that pure state, when you're trying to command it and push it, it actually then stops paying attention. And I've seen some pretty funny things from that in leadership trainings. So I think these parts that might have been viewed as kind of the woo-woo or things that we didn't need to actually think about because they weren't actually taking us and paying the bills and maximizing and really producing results. This is a time that we're actually seeing that if we don't do these things, we will actually not be successful in the ways that we hope to be. And we'll also miss out on so many of the good things that are happening because we're so stressed out. Our memories aren't working, all the things that you also just pointed to. So,
Well, and like I know for myself, if I am not meditating, which like, let's be real, we're all human. I've had a great meditation practice for months and then I completely fall out of it and totally forget about it. And but I notice my brain, just from my life, tends to autopilot to a state of overwhelm. That's my brain's default state. And it's something that I've been recognizing more and more in my life, where it's like I can have literally nothing change in my life, and then all of a sudden something will trigger my nervous system, and I can go from feeling really, really good about everything going on in my life. Nothing has changed except my nervous system. And then all of a sudden I feel like I'm a complete mess and my business is a mess and my life is a mess. And that's just like my nervous system's perception of things. So if I can get my nervous system back into a state of coherence, which is exactly what that cowboy was talking about, right? That's how he communicates with his horse, because animals are so telling. Like they know when you're in a state where your nervous system is out of alignment. And I've seen this with just a number of different things. So I think the same thing also goes for leadership and the concepts that you're talking about, like leading with your energy. We all know the people that we love listening to and that we really admire and who own the stage. It is about the energy that they come on with, hands down, more than anything else. You can have someone come out in a suit and be completely nervous and kind of trembly, and you're not going to listen to them as much as the guy in sweatpants who owns the stage. So it's this concept of controlling your life through controlling your own energy and controlling what's around you, or maybe not controlling, but influencing what's around you. And then when we do talk about control, that's when you have control of your own body, is when you can control your own state, because your brain is the most powerful drug you'll ever have and controls all the chemistry in your body. That's how the placebo effect works.
Very true. And then, yeah, the last thing I'll touch on with that is I've been recently attending this Colorado Thought Leadership Forum where, you have leaders from all types of different industries. And instead of, talking about best practices of growth hacking and, things that I've seen so often in the past, they're talking about self-awareness. They're talking about things that are actually, what is your relationship with your family? They're really bringing in the fullness because again, if we're not in that coherence, that irregularity is then going to show up in other places. So let's make sure that we're all getting tuned up. I like the term somatic hygiene. I've been saying that recently, and I think to really live in this day and age, we need to be very mindful of these things in a consistent way because just like going to the gym, just like eating healthy, just like also moving through emotions and really honoring these processes is going to be very crucial.
Can I get nerdy for one more
You
second?
may.
Okay, cool. Thanks. So when we start talking about emotions and like the energy that we're running with in our life, so emotions, there's this great book by Candace Pert called The Molecules of Emotion. And it's basically about how your emotions are actually peptides, they're proteins in your body. That's how you experience them because it creates a neurochemical reaction. If you suppress your emotions, it is like pouring gravel in a grandfather clock. It will still work. It's just going to grind the gears wrong and it's not going to work as well. So if you have all these unfelt emotions, there is so much research showing that people that have struggled with that kind of concept and not really processing their emotions usually end up with some kind of illness later in their life. So if you can create space to feel these emotions and move through them, because emotion, energy in motion, right? Like we have to move the energy. That is what some of these practices can be really helpful for, is it's like, yes, you're coming in, you're calming your system down, but you're also creating space for yourself to go deeper than we do in our daily life. We tend to operate in this space where we don't we just kind of get the next thing done. And we're always looking at our next project and like, yeah, we might say I love you to a family member, but like how deep of a place was that actually coming from?
Mhm.
And if you're experiencing anger or grief, I think grief is something that we all experience. And it doesn't just have to be somebody dying, right? It can be a future that you were expecting not happening. It can be the loss of some form of security, like your home or a job or a friendship. And that grief can get stuck in your body. So when we allow ourselves to enter these states of calm, all of a sudden we can have tears erupt and
Mhm.
emotions come out, and you're like not even sure what they're tied to. But it's actually your body processing all that gravel in the grandfather clock so that your body can actually work properly. And when we do this, then we can actually oscillate at a much higher frequency, because it's really hard to reach a state of heart coherence if you have these molecules floating around in your body of grief that haven't been processed yet, and you keep suppressing them and you keep suppressing them, and then you wonder why you can't reach a state of peace.
Mhm.
So this actually creates an opportunity to process the debris energetically in your body that needs to happen for you to reach your state of true potential.
It just makes me feel empathy for, so much of the talk therapy and things that people have done for years where, not only is there suppression, there's also reactivation. And I think that what I've been witnessing, especially at the Zen Den, is people able to move through grief that doesn't need to actually be attached to anything. It doesn't take away the story. It doesn't take away something happening. It actually is just that there's this latent energy that is still literally in the tissues. The issues are in the tissues. Body Keeps the Score is another great book for those who are wanting to go deeper. But yeah, I think the beauty of all this is what we're pointing to is that it doesn't have to be so laborious. It doesn't have to be so hard. The devotion is what's hard, the commitment to wanting change, because also these little chemicals that you speak of, we're in a way addicted to them because that actually allows us to feel what we think is ourselves. So if we know ourselves to be grumpy and I don't do well in the morning and all these stories, well, our body thinks that's the truth. And so it'll give us chemicals to say that this is, yeah, we'll agree with this. And then that's where we get into a very downward cycle of, um, you know,
Well, and I think this plays out even more for people who have experienced trauma or turmoil at some point in their life, especially in early life. Because if you've experienced that, especially before like age 6, it gets imprinted into your subconscious mind that that's like the normal state of being. And I think that's why my brain defaults to a state of overwhelm, right? Is just because that was the state that was more normalized, and it was less normal to be in a calm state. So I have to like mentally consciously practice being in a calm state on a regular basis, because otherwise my brain just kind of defaults to its neurological default mode network. And that's also what these opportunities are for, is it's a chance to break your neurological default mode state. And we can start to rewire the brain, but it takes practice. And yes, it is true. You can literally get addicted to being depressed, or you can get addicted to being anxious, or you can get addicted to being angry, because it can feel validating at the time. It is what is familiar. And then if we start talking about it in a nerdy biochemical way, so if you have a certain level of cortisol, which is like your stress hormone in your body, and it's up here, and your body gets used to that, your cells literally develop the right amount of receptors to receive that. And then all of a sudden, if you start meditating and your cortisol goes down, your cellular receptors are like, hey, where's my cortisol? And your body's like, we're not in homeostasis anymore. We're not in our normal state. Do that thing that you do to produce the cortisol. It's about like as complicated as your cells think. But what they're doing is they're sending signals to your brain to produce cortisol. So all of a sudden you start thinking about all the bills you have to pay and that work project coming up and that relationship that's having an issue and your friend that you're arguing with. You start thinking about everything stressful in your life to produce cortisol, which is why people who don't do this as a regular practice or are sitting down to meditate for the first time, it's almost like painful because you're sitting there and your brain is just going through everything that you're stressed about. But the idea is it's an exercise. So you get pulled away, you start thinking about stress, and you go, no, come back to heart coherence. And then you start thinking about stress, and you go, come back to heart coherence. You start thinking about this, and you come back to heart coherence. And you might have to do that 1,000 times in one sitting. But the whole idea is that you are starting to train this muscle that it is okay. And then when your body experiences that enough, where your cortisol is not at that high level, your cellular receptors adapt. They go, oh, okay, so we want a new state of cortisol. Got it. I'm going to suck in these receptors so that we only have this many to receive cortisol. So your cells literally change. But that is like why you literally have a biochemical addiction to your own stress state, is because you cellularly go through a physical withdrawal to your own emotions, right?
Well, and the part I just would love to express is, how much knowledge, obviously, this wonderful human here has.
Nerd all day.
But the thing that, really, I think she did point to is that, heart coherence can act as the anchor to come back to. It can come back to this focal point. So whether it is all these different things that we're talking about, and the reason we're talking about them is because heart coherence isn't just, taking the test and seeing where you're at, or, looking at your Apple Watch or your Fitbit, these new bio trackers that it really do provide value. But if we're not actually using the data, then, I need a higher score. That actually isn't really how you should be viewing it. And I think that we need to empower people through education. And, this brings us to the next part of where can we actually start doing this with partners. You know, this we've talked about kind of our individual foundation, but then we, have opportunities to actually do these practices. We talked about rituals, intention setting, I think is something really beautiful that I've gotten into more recently, and really even visioning together, in these places that, we spoke of even the heart magnetism. And I'm a practicer of transcendental meditation, and the Maharishi felt that if 1% of the population of the world was meditating at the same time in the same frequency, we could actually change the quantum physics of our planet and the energy that surrounds it. And there is quantum physicists and very esteemed people at the Maharishi University exploring this. And again, I mean, we're taking heart coherence into a much, much bigger place than just what is it for us. So going back a little bit more small, how do we do that with partners? And yeah, just curious what your own background or your background of clients has been.
Sure. So I thought of a couple different things when you said partners. So yeah, I do this with clients all the time. And I'll tell you, so I do this technique that is for releasing trauma. It's a physical based technique. That's the one that got me out of research and into body work, because I had all this anxiety in my body and no one talked to me about my diet or meditation or yoga or any of those things. And just, went the conventional route. They tried all the chemistry, didn't work. And then I went to this person that basically did this like physical technique where they used touch to stimulate the brain in a certain way where it goes into that alpha state, and it's like rebooting a computer. And I was so amazed that I ended up going into body work because I wanted to be able to work on people, and then just picked the degree that let me do all the things that I wanted to do, because there's not a degree in holistic wellness practitioner, but that's really what I wanted to do. And when I do this technique on people, if I'm distracted and I'm thinking about my own life and I'm like thinking about my next patient, I'm thinking about the errands that I need to run, it doesn't work as well.
Mm-hmm.
So the best results that I get when I do this technique are when I sit in a state of meditation while I'm doing this touch technique on this other person. I've literally had people tell me that like when I do that state, when I'm in that state well the whole time, they've told me that they get like tingles in their body.
Mhm.
So, it's this concept of energy workers. They've even like energy workers who do it really well, they've measured the frequencies in their hands, and their hands literally put out the same hertz frequency as an ultrasound machine. So when a healer is truly in that kind of state, you are literally emitting that frequency. Now, let's think about, because you mentioned partners and we're talking about, Valentine's Day and things coming up. Imagine if you had a chance to communicate with your partner where you're both in a state of heart coherence versus in a state of being in slight beta. The conversation you're going to have and the level of communication you're going to have and the words you're going to choose are going to be exceptionally different. And so if we can start to practice these states, not only for ourselves, but with and for the people around us, you actually start to regulate other people.
Mhm.
So even if you just practice this by yourself and you go back to your family, because come on, like we all have our family stuff. What do they say? Like if you think you're enlightened, go hang out with your family.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we all have our family stuff. But if you start regulating yourself and then you go around other people who are dysregulated, your state of regulation, if you can maintain it, will literally start to regulate other people around you.
Yeah. And I think that then that also couples with the cadence, things like coherent listening and acts of appreciation and really even just reflection and appreciation. I've liked getting into that before a meal when I do that with somebody else and just sharing what our gratitude is for world and for each other brings that coherence right online through that connection. Uh, it was actually my birthday last month, and there's a thing called the honey pot where everybody just says these ways that you've impacted them or the ways that they see you. And so, I love that we can also be playful and remember that we're all in this together. And so when we can build these practices and these skills and these aptitudes in some ways on our own, but it's also in the exercising of them that allows us, I think, to refine and to imprint. And yeah, it makes me excited to see what the future is, especially now that science technology is meeting the ancient wisdom that has been around for so long. And I think that the trust that is starting to happen, especially post-pandemic, we see that there's a need, and we see that loneliness and isolation and these things have very, very deleterious effects. So I'm gonna just mention if any questions, please put them in the chat. We're kind of getting nearer to the end, so I want to make sure if there is any burning questions. I do, there's a couple other things that I think we'll be excited to chat about if there isn't any questions. But the one thing that I also want to make sure that I invite from anybody that's, watching this now or watching the replay is that we really do want to work with facilitators, with coaches. This isn't something that as these, I think, kind of advocates for others, we need to also be resourced and not have to do this all alone. And we also need to do these things ourselves. Just like Dr. Christine said, how much more powerful your business and your gift and your offerings can be when you're doing these things and really the right relationship of making sure it's from top down and you're not just I know a lot of teachers that have gotten out of the pattern of doing their own stuff because they're just trying to get by, and I think we need to also kind of start working together. And so that's something that the Denver Zen Den, we want to make it accessible for especially people that don't, maybe the coaches and the facilitators that are looking for that extra add-on to give them a little bit of thought leadership, a little bit of something unique, working with these tools that we're talking about, and especially working in I think, coherent I think narrative that the client feels so that they're actually getting care for multiple different people with the same energy and the same coherent messaging, it really, again, going back to trust, we can't just keep sending people from one place to the next, and that there's no webbing and interstitialness. So that's something that we hope to bring. And Dr. Christine is also great at doing talks and also, of course, doing things with the body. And yeah, let's just speak a little bit more of what's ahead for you this year and how are these things kind of weaving in your world?
Yeah. The one other thing that I will mention that the brain and the body love are novelty.
Mm.
They love new experiences. So even if you have wonderful practices in your life that allow you to reach these states and have heart coherence and stuff, like I have a ton of practices in my life, I still like going to the Zen Den because each time it's a slightly different experience. And each time you have different intentions that you're going with. And again, it's making time to create that spaciousness for yourself where you can access the depth that we all have, but we don't always make time for in today's world. And if you can go and have some kind of new experience, you can weave that back into the practices that you have
Mm.
and make them more powerful simply by having something new. And I know that, like, even though I've done a lot of different kinds of meditation and different things, I still like going to different meditation retreats because every time I go, I have some kind of new internal experience that I call upon later during other times in my life. And so I just wanted to throw that in there.
Transformation without the travel. You heard it here first.
Yes, yes, because let's be real, not everybody has time to go fly to another country for a week, and we have families and things that we have to do. So sometimes being able to have like a little home retreat, like we're talking about, it's still the way that you can create that depth and you can go back to your family like you just got back from a mini retreat, and you can bring that energy with you, which I think is great because you went and created a novel experience for yourself, which is why those retreats are often beneficial. Is it's breaking pattern, it's interrupting the default mode network, it's creating a new experience, and it's bringing back different energy. So for myself, the way that this plays out is like, I know you and I have been working on some cool coursework that we want to bring together, and I've been kind of redesigning the way that I present it for people because I spend most of my time asking people what they need, because I think a lot of people design stuff that they're passionate about. They don't always ask the public what they need. And so I've talked to thousands of you guys online and just asking what people need. And it's usually about understanding how the body works and understanding the different modalities that we can use. Because we're all told to meditate and do breath work and cold plunge and all these things. Not everybody teaches us how to use them and for how long and how far on that spectrum and when to not use them and when to use something different and when to shift things. So like I love my practices that I have, but I also know myself, I get bored with things. So it's good for me to like rotate my practices and try different things and figure out when my body needs one thing versus when my body needs another. So that's a lot of what I'm going to be teaching. And I was actually just in Arizona hanging out with a bunch of professional athletes and talking to them about these same things, because you think about that high performing population, they are always on, like they're always in the on state and they don't really get to come out of it. And if you think about like the Super Bowl just happened, right? Think about those guys on the field. They are basically in a state of battle. Like internally, their cells, their body is perceiving it like they're in the Battle of Troy. And so their nervous system needs to come out of that state. And when we go to like the variability, kind of bringing it full circle that we were talking about, like we were talking about getting cut off in traffic, I want my body to respond with beta when I get cut off in traffic so that I don't hit that person. But I also want to be able to come right back out of beta and into a state that's calm for myself and being able to move between those. So what's coming up for me is like, I really want to teach you guys how to do this stuff and how to understand it. So it's not just people doing something to you or telling you what to do. It's someone doing something with you and showing you how to do it for yourself. Because to me, that is a sustainable model of health. I think our current health system is built around people doing stuff to you and you being a victim to your environment and no one teaching you what your lab work means or why your body does this. And so I think if we can start to take our power back and feel empowered in our own bodies by understanding how they work and how to work with them instead of against them, that is the model of vitality, and that's the model of health that's actually sustainable to live.
You just brought two things to mind that I hadn't really thought of in this way. And you spoke of the athletes being kind of in the Battle of Troy, and parents are also in that. I don't think that they ever get respite.
No, parents, that's a huge one,
Probably
yeah.
even more so. And again, we give such, well, we all honor parents, but of course, athletes we see in these certain heroic ways, and I think are starting to understand how parents really do need to get support. And we have definitely seen a lot of that at the Zen Den, where just that respite and that reset, so that they can show up with the love and the things that they do have. But just when you are in that flight or fight system and state all the time or on a regular basis, it really can deplete the capacity. And then you also brought up novelty and awe, and we also have a lot of baby boomers coming in. And what is actually interesting that just kind of connected for me is that they're coming in to almost get a glimpse of themselves from back when they were an artist, or back in the 60s as a hippie, or these different times and moments that just had specialness, whether it was even sitting at a campfire with their grandmother. We've had some really beautiful just uh, connections to moments that had that impact. And I don't think we need to do always the psychedelics and the things, even though those are great bridges and great ways to expand the palette and uncover some things that might be needed to tend to. We also need to be doing these things on the more consistent basis, and also even in preparation and integration from these peak experiences, because you know.
Well, and like the way that I'll put it super simply, it's a state of recovery.
There you go.
You're inducing a state of physiological recovery, because when I go back to talking about those athletes, I was talking to them about this a lot. Sitting in front of the TV or playing video games, or I mean, maybe sitting and reading a book, aren't totally states of recovery because you're still being stimulated. And like, especially like, let's say, like, I don't know, like I've watched the show Suits a little bit. It's a cool show. It's kind of an intense show. They're talking about a lot of intense things. So even though you're sitting there, the intensity of your show mirrors the intensity that your nervous system is going through. So I don't really count that as a state of recovery. This, however, I do count as a state of recovery because you're actually kind of entering more of like an alpha calmed brainwave state. And that is the beauty of music and the way that you incorporate the acoustic vibrational therapy, is when you think about like being at a concert and everyone is sharing this frequency from the concert and the music, it all puts us on the same wavelength. And so music has this incredible ability to affect us through frequency. So the type of music you listen to also matters for your state of recovery. So going through these experiences, it's putting your nervous system in a state of recovery. And then when we come back to what we were talking about at the beginning with, we're surrounded by frequencies we don't even know, from 5G to Wi-Fi to getting 60 text messages in a day and 500 emails and being expected to respond to all of them. Like, that's actually a pretty stressful thing. And, I noticed I was out in the wilderness once and I was kind of like lost in the wilderness and running out of water. And I realized I was like less stressed out about that than I was about not answering my 400 work emails. And that was a big realization for me. And so when we realize that we have so much more going on in our world than we used to, sometimes we need help now entering a state of recovery. Like sometimes you can do it on your own in meditation, but if you're out of practice or it's something that's new for you and it's not familiar, this is a way to build that roadmap so that you can understand where you're trying to go and you can experience the feelings first so that you can remember them later to return to the same state.
Yeah, that definitely lands. And my final thing that I'll just put here is, is remembering that forgiveness is also part of creating coherence.
Huge part.
I think that quite often we want everything to be good and activated and joyous and these things, and we really need to also recognize that unconditional support and these more intimate ways of showing up for the people we care about is uh, something we need to be paying attention to. And especially, I'm very grateful for men's work and some things in my life that brought that closer to me and friendships like yours. And uh, any final thoughts from you?
When we enter this state of recovery, we are a better parent, a better partner, a better friend, and just better in our lives overall because we're coming from a state of having a pitcher that's full instead of pouring from something that's empty.
Well, thanks everybody for joining tonight. I will be sending out some information that'll also have Dr. Christine's information if you want to look into what she's up to a little bit more. And as she said, we have some things in percolation right now that you'll be seeing here in the next couple months of where we can go deeper with her education and some of our tools. And the combination of them can be quite we'll put it off. They can be quite awful.
Just powerful. It's fun to do these things together because I think one of the things that's missing from our world of healthcare is practitioners collaborating.
Yeah.
And so I want to collaborate more. And, even if I'm not the right practitioner for what you're looking for, I for sure know someone for you. So reach out with your questions and we'll help you find the right people because that's really what we want to do. We want to create community. I think the world is needing community more than ever right now.
Yep. All right. Thanks everyone for sharing your Monday evening. And we hope to see you again later this week at one of our other events. You can find that information in the Instagram bio of the Denver Zen Den. That's probably the easiest. I will also update the website to have that information as well. Thank you.